in admissions to the military service academies. Currently, all of the military service academies use race and ethnicity as selection criteria for admissions. Not only is this a violation of the Constitution, as recently affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court, it is a violation of the military's long-standing meritocratic principles. The military service academies are elite universities which train and educate the future leaders of our armed services. We need the best and the brightest, the most fit cadets and midshipmen, regardless of their skin color and ethnicity. To consider immutable characteristics like race and ethnicity as blatantly discriminatory. For our national security, we must uphold the ideals of our country and put hard work, dedication, and service above all. I reserve the remainder of my time.
The gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Washington rise?
Mr. Chair, I rise in opposition to this amendment.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Mr. Chair, Mr. Banks' amendment to prohibit our nation's service academies from promoting diverse experiences and backgrounds as part of its admissions policy will do nothing but weaken our military. The Supreme Court recently recognized in its decision to leave service academies out of its ruling on affirmative action that our academies are not laboratories for ideological gerrymandering. They are institutions that are foundational to our national security. Our service academies are responsible for providing a higher education, but also for training our nation's men and women to serve as global leaders. Many graduates will serve in the highest levels of our military and government, where success depends on maintaining an open mind, building diverse coalitions, and drawing on broad experiences. They will lead as part of a military that has never been more diverse, more capable, or more lethal. Soon, nearly half of our service members will be people of color, but only a fraction serve as officers, and even a smaller fraction as senior leaders. We learned bitter and painful lessons in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, when leaders neither understood nor looked like the formations they led. It's 2023, not 1952. If my colleagues across the aisle knew more about the painful history of this country, perhaps last night one of them would not have referred to black service members as colored people. Let's not move our country backwards. I oppose this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
I'd like
to thank the gentleman from Indiana for introducing this amendment. I think it's a common sense amendment. Right now, there are all sorts of rumors out there that when people are admitted to the service academies, which after all are going to wind up running our military, the one part of our government that cannot fail, that preferences are being given and they're not always taking the best people that they can. I want to point out something that's a little bit offensive about this whole diversity thing. Diversity for people like the Democrat Party, sadly, is solely determined by your genetics or your DNA or where your ancestors were 200 years ago. I'll give you an example to show the foolishness of it, and that the real goal here, I think, is to divide Americans. If I am 1/4 Peruvian, I can identify as Hispanic. I can identify as Hispanic despite the fact I've never spoke a word of Spanish and never been south of the border in my life. But the people who just want to divide America would say that I have a unique perspective growing up in a Milwaukee suburb, despite the fact that I am, 1/4 from a different part of the world. This is preposterous on its face, and it will inevitably lead to division as we are educating our military that they should look at people by where their ancestors came from, not as individuals. This true racism, which is what it absolutely is, because that's how they determine which silo you fit into, has got to be ripped away from our society and the military in particular. The idea that we have different viewpoints because of where our ancestors came from, despite the fact that we have not been there and know nothing of them, is preposterous. And like I said, in addition to the divisiveness, you're going to wind up with people who are not necessarily the best people to lead our military. Anybody familiar with military history knows the important decisions that have to be made during wartime. We want those decisions made by the brightest people we have, not by people who've been picked based upon where their DNA was 2,000 years ago. Thank you.
The gentlelady from Washington is recognized.
I yield 1 minute to the ranking member of the Military Personnel Committee, Andy Kim.
Gentleman recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, look, I want to just start off by just responding to what was just said. It is absolutely important that we set straight that diversity does not mean we're talking about people who are less qualified. We're not talking about reducing standards. We're talking about having part of the decision recognize it is one part of many. So this is not a situation where it is the overriding factor. It is one part we are still trying to, and I agree with what the Chairman Banks said, which is we want the best and brightest. But what we recognize when it comes to our service academies in particular is that this is a situation where we are trying to also build a force. This is not just about an individual. Yes, we want the best and brightest, but we also want the most cohesive and effective fighting force for our country. That we recognize we're building an entity where our service members are part of something bigger than all of them. I think about this brief that was put forward to the Supreme Court that laid out, this was written by former military officials that said the importance of maintaining... I want to yield another 30 seconds.
Additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. They said, quote, the importance of maintaining a diverse, highly qualified officer corps has been beyond legitimate dispute for decades. History has shown that placing a diverse armed forces under the command of homogeneous leadership is a recipe for internal resentment, discord, and violence. This is written by former military leaders that are advising us to make sure that we let the military be able to control, be able to have the tools that they need to build the force that our country needs. And with that, I'll yield back.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield a minute and a half to a real American hero, Mr. Mass from Florida.
Gentleman from Florida recognized.
Thank you. I'm amazed at the bigoted comments I'm hearing from the other side right now. Literally stating that units need to look a certain way. There have to be people of certain colors in these units. It's purely idiotic. It's dangerous. War is not a game. It's always dangerous. It's very often deadly. I damn near gave my life for this country. And I can tell you the last thing that I cared about was the color of the snipers that had my back or the color of the medics that were putting tourniquets on each of my legs and my left arm when I was injured on the battlefield. It didn't matter if they were black, white, brown. None of that mattered when they were recruited into the military, and it didn't matter as they were serving. It has absolutely zero place, and you're literally putting the lives of our service members in danger by saying, this is concretely what you are saying, units need to look a certain way by color. And I just posed this quick question. I don't know how much time I have remaining, but I'll bet you all over there can't tell me what my background is. Am I part black, part brown, part white? What am I? I'd yield time to you for a colloquy if you want to answer that. What am I?
To direct their comments to the chair.
Chair, I'll bet they can't tell me. I hear silence because they can't tell me, because you don't know what I am. You don't know that I'm half Mexican. You can't look at me and see that. But you believe that units should be made up of something that you can't see and that you can't ask about. Idiotic policy, dangerous for our service members, and they deserve better from the other side. I yield back.
Just a reminder, the comments are directed to be directed to the chair. The gentlewoman from Washington.
I yield 1 minute to Vice Ranking Member of the House Armed Services Committee, Pat Ryan.
Gentleman.
I thank the gentlelady, and I thank my colleague for his service. I rise as a proud graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point and a representative of the Academy today. And whether my colleagues want to recognize it or not, particularly those on the far right, we have an increasingly, growingly diverse force. And as Mr. Kim said, unit cohesion, we can all agree, is essential and critical both in the heat of battle and in training and preparation. This amendment would unequivocally, as you heard from retired military officers across the board, weaken unit cohesion. And even the considerably, to be generous, conservative Supreme Court has recognized the distinct interests of these service academies in the recent decision that came down just a few weeks ago. We have made great strides at the academies with a focus and bipartisan commitment for decades. West Point has gone from 20% to 36% cadets of minority backgrounds, Naval Academy 19% to 37%, but we still have work to do to achieve unit cohesion. I'm out of time and yield back.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield the remainder of my time to myself to close.
Recognized.
This amendment is simple. It ensures our military service academies are in line with the Supreme Court's recent decision on the unconstitutionality of race-based affirmative action, and it strives to uphold the ideals of meritocracy, which is nowhere more important than in the United States military. I urge all members to support it. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have remaining?
1 minute.
All right, Mr. Chair, I yield myself the remainder of time. Today's military leaders are unequivocal in their support of diversity in leadership. Joint Chiefs Chairman Maley considers it fundamental. Army Chief McConville calls it crucial competitive advantage. Then Air Force Chief C.Q. Brown called diversity an imperative. And Marine Corps Commandant Berger said, the core of America's strength lies in its diversity. And the very government assembled here today, in its amicus brief to the Supreme Court, characterized a diverse pool of academy graduates as a vital interest in which the nation's future depends. The American people expect and demand that our academies are given every tool and advantage to train leaders capable of fighting and winning our nation's wars. And make no mistake, diversity is not synonymous with less qualified. We want the best. We want the brightest. We need the most diverse. This amendment attempts to weaken a concept foundational to our current and future military supremacy, that diversity translates into capability and lethality. Thank you, sir, and I yield back.
Thank you. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Indiana. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Mr. Chair, I ask for a recorded vote.
Excuse me. For what purpose is the gentlelady from Washington being recognized?
Now that I'm recognized, I ask for a recorded vote.
Record has been, and pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Indiana will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 64, printed at House Report 118-142. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 64, printed in House Report number 118-142, offered by Mr. Roy of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 583, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I thank the chair. We have spent the better part of the last several days making clear to the American people that this side of the aisle wants to see a Defense Department that is focused on its core mission, defending the United States of America, rather than divvying us up by race and dividing us and separating us. I rise today to ensure that the Department of Defense is focused on its core mission rather than pursuing the political agenda of climate change to the detriment of the national security of the United States. In 2021, Department of Defense spokesman John Kirby refused to say that China is a bigger national security threat to the United States than climate change. He called them, quote, equally important, and said it doesn't do any good to make a relative, quote unquote, assessment of national security issues. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has said climate change is an existential threat to our nation's security. Next week, Secretary of State John Kerry literally travels to China to discuss climate change, not China's increased aggression against Taiwan, not its expansion in the Pacific, not its oppression of its people, not the fact that they produce 2 new coal-fired plants per week on top of the 1,100 they have, while we undermine our national security to pursue the climate fetish agenda of the other side of the aisle. President Biden's executive orders have served as the catalyst for massive reforms at the Department of Defense that compromise national security to advance this climate fetish. The amendment that I offer would prohibit any of the funding in the National Defense Authorization Act, or that flows from that authorization, from being used to carry out President Biden's executive orders on climate change. The Department of Defense's Climate Adaptation Plan includes radical proposals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at the expense of our warfighting capabilities. According to the plan, DoD has identified climate change as, quote, a critical national security issue. It mandates, quote, environmental justice, because why miss an opportunity to push divisive ideology? The DoD says it will transition to 100% carbon-free electricity, meaning America's war machine will literally depend on the wind and the sun. No one, including anyone on this side of the aisle, believes that we shouldn't pursue every advantage in technology to harness energy. No one. In Texas, we've embraced wind, we've embraced solar. But to our detriment, when we have interfered with the market and interfered with the ability of us to have energy at our disposal and at our demand. We undermine our grid. We undermine our national security. We undermine reliability. We cause energy prices to go up. And in this case, in the context of the National Defense Authorization Act, we should not be pursuing this politically motivated climate fetishization that undermines our national security. I reserve.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
I rise to claim the time in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I yield myself such time as I may consume. I'm just going to make 3 quick points here. First of all, it's interesting. You can go back to 2008 and look at John McCain's campaign and even entertainingly Sarah Palin's vice presidential statements about how climate change was an existential threat. And this was a bipartisan issue where we talked about why this was a significant challenge that we needed to address. Well, then, of course, Barack Obama had the audacity to get elected president and pursue that agenda, so suddenly it became political. And I just want to make this very, very clear that the belief here is that digging up fossil fuels from below the ground and burning them is bad for life. It's bad for the planet and will eventually exterminate the planet. So now, if you want to disagree with that, you want to have a little argument about whether or not that's true, we can. I mean, the overwhelming majority of scientists seem to agree with that. But let's hear the argument. But it just kills me to sit here and listen to the other side claim that this is a political agenda. Now, I understand why they do that, because that skips past the messy part where you have to actually argue the facts. And you can just dismiss it as politics, and everyone robotically goes, oh, yeah, it's politics, that's bad, we can't have that. But if we can have an actual discussion about this, if you believe, as the administration does, and as again, I don't know, 80% of the scientists believe, that climate change could destroy the frickin' planet, then it's worth saying that that's a national security threat, at least equivalent to China. Yes, there is the possibility of global nuclear war with China that could exterminate the planet. But climate change, the argument is, would exterminate the planet. So I think that's worth thinking about, all right? Please believe me when I say this is not a political agenda. It is a heartfelt belief that we have a distinct problem here that needs to be addressed. Second, how to address it. Come up with alternative sources of energy and make those investments. And this is also very important because even if this wasn't destroying the planet, our dependency upon oil has been problematic, all right? And I know there's this fantasy that we're going to become energy independent. Nobody's energy independent. Oil is a global marketplace. Even if we generate enough energy, We sell it overseas. And Saudi Arabia and OPEC, therefore, has an enormous amount of control over that market. And as I've said over and over again, the true answer to this problem is, when gas prices go up, wouldn't it be great to say, that's wonderful, but we don't need that. We have other sources of energy to go to. And nothing is more important in the military than energy and access to it, all right? Wars are started over having access to the energy that you need. So to say that this isn't involved in national security literally hurts my brain, all right? You need these alternatives. And the last argument is on this market. Well, let the market decide. The market subsidized the living hell out of the oil industry for 175 years. So they have an enormous advantage. The pipelines, the system, the entire thing that was built on our taxpayer dollars. So now what we're saying is if we're going to develop an alternative to that, then we're going to have to help that, as we help nuclear energy, a whole bunch of other different things. I don't think I hear the other side complaining about the government subsidizing nuclear energy, because that fits within their politics. So if I ask nothing else, could we please just have a rational discussion that understands that this is a legitimate policy issue? It isn't a fetish. It isn't a political debate. It's the fate of the planet and how we manage energy policy, both of which, and I'm going to take a real bold step here, actually impact national security. I believe that they do, and I believe that anybody would agree with that statement. So please, defeat this amendment. I reserve whatever time I have left.
Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Well, I appreciate my colleague for basically making the case for the very climate fetish that I describe. When he talks about the need for energy and its existence for national security, my point is having reliable energy. We have to have energy that is available and reliable and dependable. That's the whole point. And my colleague talks about nuclear power. Great. I'm waiting with bated breath for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to embrace and promote and push non-carbon producing nuclear power. We haven't generated a new nuclear power plant since when? What, the 1970s? Georgia isn't even off the ground because of federal regulation and interference. The fact is, we are subsidizing and promoting unreliable wind and solar while subsidizing the hell out of electronic vehicles, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to use the Defense Department to continue to promote it, which is engaged in crony capitalism to enrich a small handful of elitists on the back of hardworking American people, while we subsidize China and make ourselves reliable on China for their minerals and what they produce. It is absolutely astonishing that we would turn over our national defense capability to China at this point in time to pursue this radical agenda. I yield back.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. I will just note that we are making investments in nuclear power. It's really expensive and it's difficult to develop, but the investments are being made. That is part of the agenda. And with that, I would yield the balance of my time to Mr. Garamendi.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. I'm actually quite amazed that we're allowing a political ideology to get in the way of reality and facts. The fact of the matter is that the U.S. military, more than a decade ago, noticed that the climate was changing and they needed to address it. Also, the fact is that the largest solar and wind energy systems in the nation are in Texas. And Texas is dependent upon those for their power when the heat wave arrives. Let's be smart here. Let's not let ideology and the fact that we want to get into a fight over climate change get in the way of good public policy. It's absolutely essential that the military build for the future, that they build for resiliency. And I'm out of time, so I yield back.
It's a quick minute. Time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
What?
The amendment is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
I request a recorded vote. Thank you.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed. The chair understands that amendment number 65 will not be offered. It is now in order to consider amendment number 66, printed in House Report 118-142. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 66, printed in House Report number 118-142, offered by Mr. Davidson of Ohio.
Pursuant to House Resolution 583, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Chairman. The amendment I've offered would prevent the Department of Defense from purchasing data that would otherwise require a warrant, court order, or subpoena. The amendment would also end unauthorized surveillance practices. The government is currently circumventing the Fourth Amendment by purchasing location data, internet browsing data, and other sensitive information. The so-called data broker loophole is a severe threat to the right to privacy in the United States. Freedom surrendered is rarely reclaimed, but we must defend our Fourth Amendment. Government surveillance programs are routinely misused and targeted at Americans. The FBI, in fact, admits it conducted 278,000 improper searches of American citizens in 2020 alone. If the government can buy its way around the Fourth Amendment, there will be few meaningful limits on government surveillance. We need to pass this amendment. It at least stops the Department of Defense from doing that inside the United States of America. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition? Oh, I'm sorry. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
People get us confused all the time. That's okay. I ask unanimous consent to claim time in opposition to the amendment, though I'm not opposed to the amendment.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank the gentleman for offering the amendment. Ubiquitous commercial data collection and bulk data sales represent a privacy concern for all Americans. Companies and governments alike have access to once unimaginable amounts of user data through commercial channels. This development and the Fourth Amendment questions that come with it deserve full consideration. I look forward to working with the gentleman on this amendment to ensure that these issues are addressed in a manner that does not unduly burden the Department of Defense relative to the rest of the federal government while ensuring its operational needs are met. I think Congress will spend a substantial amount of time on the privacy concerns addressed by this amendment in the coming months, and I welcome that discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
I appreciate the support of my colleagues to get this amendment to this point, and frankly, the commitment to the work ahead. It's important for our national security, but the whole premise of the Department of Defense is to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So the way we go about it has to preserve the way of life that our Constitution establishes, that the Bill of Rights guarantees that our protections will exist, and we have a lot of work to do to restore the protections of our Fourth Amendment. This amendment is an important first step, and I ask all of our colleagues to unite and make it a fully bipartisan level of support. And I yield back.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The chair understands that amendment number 67 will not be offered. The chair understands that amendment number 68 will not be offered. The chair understands that amendment number 69 will not be offered. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to HRS 583, I offer amendments en bloc.
The clerk will designate the amendments en bloc.
En bloc consisting of amendments numbered 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 26, 29, 36, 37, 38, 39, 42, 43, 44, 53, 54, 60, 65, 67, 68, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, and 80. Printed in House Report Number 118-142, offered by Mr. Rogers of Alabama.
Pursuant to House Resolution 583, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Rogers, and the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Smith, each will control 15 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I'd like to yield 30 seconds to my friend and colleague from Iowa, Mr. Nunn.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a nearly 20-year combat veteran and head of counterintelligence for cyber, I know firsthand the millions of threats that are leveraged against our country on a daily basis. As we look to strengthen our security with this bill offered by the chair and the amendment going forward, I want to thank those who have worked so diligently on our joint effort to create a National Digital Reserve Corps to buttress our country against this threat. Additionally, I want to speak about another win for our military parents. As both an Air Force officer, reservist, and Guards member, we have worked on bipartisan legislation in the Reserve Component Parental Leave Parity Act that I helped lead with Representative Jeff Jackson from North Carolina. Our servicemen and women deserve time with their new children, and this policy would expand parental leave for our drilling Reserve and National Guard member.
Has expired.
An additional 30 seconds.
Additional 30 seconds.
To be able to match the leave of their active duty members. This is a big bipartisan win to improve the lives of our members who are serving, including myself as a parent of foster children. Unfortunately, as a result of a backroom deal, we were not able to serve those who needed help from suicide prevention. In my home state of Iowa, we have almost 4 times the number of individuals who take their life after coming back from combat. We will not stop fighting for this, and while we can't include in this amendment, we will move forward with the chairman to make sure that we are able to protect those who have served it overseas and take their own life when coming back. With that, thank you, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Stanton.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, moving the National Defense Authorization Act forward has almost always been a bipartisan effort. This very bill, as originally drafted, passed out of committee with near unanimous votes from both Democrats and Republicans, 59-1. That's why it's unconscionable that extremist politicians are willing to jeopardize our military readiness and our national security to push their unpopular partisan agenda. In the dead of night, extreme lawmakers tacked on divisive, dangerous amendments, including one that would prevent servicewomen from accessing critical abortion care. More than 400,000 women serve on active duty in the armed forces and in the reserves. At great personal sacrifice, these servicewomen have sworn an oath to defend the United States and to live, train, and work at assigned duty stations often far from home. Almost immediately after Roe was overturned last summer, states around the country began enacting draconian abortion bans and restrictions. Today, nearly half of servicewomen no longer have access to abortion care. Many live hundreds of miles from the nearest provider. Access to abortion should not depend on where someone lives or where they are stationed. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin rightly noted that the Dobbs decision would, quote, would interfere with the U.S. military's ability to recruit, retain, and maintain the readiness of a highly qualified force, unquote, and announced earlier this year that the DoD would cover travel and lodging expenses for servicewomen and military family members forced to travel for health care. But the colleagues on the other side of the aisle would see that this policy is overturned. Now, I have voted for the NDAA every year that I have served in Congress, but I cannot in good conscience vote for this legislation in its current form. We must provide for a national defense, but this bill will egregiously harm nearly 1/5 of this country's fighting force, and I will not turn my back on our servicewomen and military families. I yield back.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I'd like to yield 1 minute to my friend from California, Mike Garcia.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this historic NDAA. I rise in support of the strong NDAA. It prioritizes the true mission of our U.S. military, and that's to deter and to win wars. That's it. It's pretty simple. And more specifically, it prioritizes America's greatest national security asset, our brave men and women in uniform who serve on a daily basis. And I want to thank Chairman Rogers for his support of my amendment within this en bloc that will secure the highest pay raise in history for nearly 1 million of our junior enlisted troops, paid for by the appropriations bill. This takes a starting salary for an E1 in the military from about $22,000 a year to $31,200 a year. It gets them above the poverty line, off of food stamps. And these brave men and women are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice in defense of our freedom, and it's unacceptable that they were making less than fast food workers. I couldn't be more proud of this historic victory, and I couldn't be more eager, Mr. Speaker, to continue fighting for those who fight so hard to give us our security blanket. I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time I'd like to yield 1 minute to an outstanding freshman member, Mr. Van Orden from Wisconsin.
Thank you, Mr.
Gentleman is
Chairman.
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in opposition of Amendment 875 of the en bloc. I have tremendous respect for Chairmans Green and Rogers, and I also view the Chinese Communist Party as a threat to world peace. With that said, I believe the unintended consequences of this amendment will have a greater negative financial impact on our junior enlisted servicemen who shop at our base exchanges than on the Chinese Communist Party. Our junior enlisted currently struggle financially, and the implementation of this amendment will unintentionally raise the cost of everyday goods and further exacerbate this strain. For this reason alone, I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time I'd like to yield 1 minute to my friend from Texas, Mr. Jackson.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to start by saying, despite the objections of many of the other, folks on the other side of the aisle regarding this National Defense Authorization Act, which I consider to be an outstanding bill that I'm aggressively and enthusiastically supporting, despite the objections on the other side of the aisle, most of the controversial amendments in this amendment do nothing but return us to the initial and the long time combat readiness attitude that the military has always had, and focusing all of our efforts on that particular goal. But I want to rise also in support of the en bloc, and this en bloc includes an amendment of mine which will prohibit cadets or midshipmen from being punished for not receiving the COVID vaccine. An adverse action documented in a member's service record can have a devastating impact, potentially ending a rising military career before it even has an opportunity to begin. Last year, here on the floor of the House, Ranking Member Smith told us that another vaccine mandate could be implemented in the future if the Biden administration decided to do so. I refuse to sit on the sidelines and let the Biden administration's politically motivated efforts to appease the radical left cost young men and women their futures. And with that, I strongly urge support of the overall NDAA, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I continue to reserve. Thank you.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This time I'd like to yield 1 minute to my friend from New York, Mr. Molinaro.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Speaker, I rise both in appreciation and support of my amendment, including the en bloc, which will require a study to identify potential vulnerabilities in U.S. military systems and infrastructure that could be exploited by adversarial AI applications used by China, Russia, and other adversaries. I also want to thank the Chairman for his leadership and this House for supporting a number of amendments that were included and adopted yesterday. They go on to support military families and their children with intellectual and developmental disabilities, ensure the DoD guarantees full access and coverage of life-saving opioid overdose reversal drugs, and requires our nation's biodefense strategy, along with helping the Army meet its goals to modernize aircraft and more. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I extend my appreciation and yield back.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
We have no further speakers if the gentleman would like to close.
Minutes.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I just want to take this moment, and I will have remarks in a moment, while regrettably I'm not supporting this particular bill. But that doesn't change how much respect I have for the process and for all the people who participated in that process. And I want to make sure we understand that. That's always one of the things I always say. I believe in democracy more than I believe in my own opinion, which means that the process is important and the way we put that process together and that we move through it. And in particular, I definitely want to thank the staff, certainly our staff on the House Armed Services Committee that's done an outstanding job, the Rules Committee staff as well, but also the floor staff and the parliamentarians and all the folks who have to put the amendments together and put the legislation together. Throughout this process, from the very start, when the original bill was introduced, to all of the amendments, and we've run through these numbers, it's in the thousands, basically, of amendments and ideas that are submitted from the moment we put together the initial bill, we amended it in committee, they deal with rules, they amended on the floor. We're talking literally thousands of different pieces of legislation and ideas that have to be brought together. And we members don't do any of that. We spout out the ideas, and a whole bunch of staff work really hard to get that done. And I thank you very, very much for all of that work to make this process go forward. And also, it is a good, robust, bipartisan approach. We have the amendments, we have the debates, we resolve it. And one thing I want to make clear, I'm not thrilled with the outcome of the Rules Committee, but that's the nature of being in the minority. When you're in the majority, the Rules Committee does what the Rules Committee does, and the minority complains about it. That's the way this place works, and that's fine, okay? I might have done it differently in terms of trying to figure out how to pass the bill, but at the end of the day, I don't have any process objection here. The amendments were put on the floor, and they passed. So I'm not concerned about that. I am concerned about the outcome. And I will explain that later. But I just wanted to take a moment to really make it clear how much I thank all the people who put this process together, and in particular to thank Chairman Rogers for his work as committee chairman. I yield myself an additional 30 seconds. Pull this together, and it's not as easy as it looks. Let me just sum that up. So, a whole lot of things you gotta manage there, including the minority party. And I think Mike has done an outstanding job of doing that in his first year as chair. I appreciate that, and I respect that, and I thank everybody for the process they put together. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
I'm going to close. Do you want to?
I'm not closing yet, so you should reserve.
Okay, I reserve then. Yeah.
Thank you. And with that, I yield.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you. I yield 3 minutes to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, member of the committee, Ms. Houlihan.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Later today, I will offer the motion to recommit on this bill. I stand with my colleagues who have stood shoulder to shoulder in support of our brave service members in an effort to put together this bill for the last nearly a year. I stand with the spirit of those who are currently serving in uniform, who are sick and tired of this legislative body politicizing their lives, their livelihoods, and their bodily autonomy. I rise today in honor of my grandfather and my father, who served full, distinguished careers in the military, and my mom and my grandmother, who served as military spouses, each for over 30 years. I rise today as someone who was born and grew up on a military base and moved across this nation and to other countries. And I rise as someone who raised my own hand and my own child when the time came. And I rise for my cousins who serve today. I don't need my colleagues to tell me what it's like to be a mom in uniform. I lived that experience. Or a child in the military. I lived that too. So here I am today, standing up on behalf of all servicewomen and military families who are willing to risk their lives for our freedoms. And yet we are not willing to protect theirs. What I have seen over the floor in the past 2 days has really saddened me. Targeting LGBTQ families like my own, targeting libraries, targeting the reproductive freedoms of servicewomen and military families stationed in states that do not respect their own bodily autonomy. Chair, we even saw a colleague refer to our black service members as colored people. To my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, let me make a few things clear. We agree there are threats around the world like China that we should be spending our time and efforts on. We agree the historic recruitment challenges we face are a risk to our national security. We agree the brave men and women who serve in uniform should not be used as political pawns. So why? Why did this Republican-led body decide to take a historically bipartisan piece of legislation from the House Armed Services Committee hostage by adding scores of extreme GOP culture war priorities to it, including, least of all, clear as day, a backdoor policy to a national abortion ban? Chair, I want the American people to know that Democrats support our men and women in uniform. We proudly voted forward a bipartisan piece of legislation to increase their pay, to improve their housing, to expand their access to child care, 58-1. But the GOP is putting that bipartisan progress in jeopardy, and the toughest part is that they know it. I have a great deal of respect for the handful of my colleagues who recognize the extreme turn that this legislation has taken, and I thank them. And so I look at them again, and I look to them again. We must do what is right by our service members, put the political gamesmanship aside, and return this extreme bill back to committee where it can return it to its bipartisan nature. I will work tirelessly across the aisle to ensure that we give the President and our nation, and in fact our globe, a bill that truly provides for the collective defense of our American values. It really saddens me to say that this bill does not do that. This bill will hurt our recruitment and retention, and it makes it extremely difficult for our proud veterans.
Has expired.
The gentlelady, an additional 30 seconds.
A proud veteran like myself and so many others to look at future leaders of America and say that, yes, this military is a home for you. I took the uniform nearly 30 years ago, and it's a travesty that servicewomen today will have less freedoms than I did. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this MPTR, send this extreme bill back to committee where we can truly deliver for those in uniform. Thank you, Chair, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
I continue to reserve.
Reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. And I think the gentlelady from Pennsylvania summed it up reasonably well, but I really want to make sure people understand why we're opposed to this bill. We are opposed to this bill because it is our firm belief that this will undermine our ability to meet the national security objectives of this country. And I want to explain why. We can start with the issue of access to reproductive health care for women. Because of the Dobbs decision, there are many states now across this country where you cannot get access to that care. The Department of Defense, faced with that, having a large number of women and family members of service members in those states, set up a situation to allow those women to get access to that reproductive care. This bill takes that away. So if you are a woman concerned about your ability to get an abortion, first of all, or concerned about if you're a service member who has a family member who might be concerned about that, you are going to be less likely to join the military. And I really do want to emphasize one point that came up during this. And I understand a lot of people oppose abortion. They want to ban it outright, and that's why they feel this way. But do understand the negative impact that that will have on a lot of women's willingness to join the military. And it goes beyond abortion, as we have sadly seen. And the worst case of this is a woman who miscarriages midway through her pregnancy cannot get treated for that. There was one particular case that was cited during the debate of a woman who wound up in the emergency room fighting for her life because of an infection because she could not get that care. So if you are a woman, or if you are a man who is considering, well, what about my spouse? What about my children? You will be less likely to join the military knowing that you have that challenge. So we are going to have fewer qualified people willing to join the military because of what was passed. That will not make our military stronger. We have also now said, the debate seems to imply, that trans people don't exist, so they are not welcome in the military either. Now, I am not a doctor and therefore don't want to presume what treatment someone should have who is in a transgender situation, but what this bill says is, nope, we're not even going to consider it. So again, if you are a trans person, you're going to be less likely to join the military. Or if you're just someone who thinks, well, what if I have a child who's a trans person? The military is not going to accept them. So now you can take trans people off the table. They're not going to join the military either. And then we have the most difficult aspect of this, and that is the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece. And this is a very widely misunderstood thing, and I tried to explain it throughout the debate. We, believe it or not, have a history of discrimination in this country. We have a history of bigotry. You can go through slavery and Jim Crow and the Ku Klux Klan and a whole bunch of different things. We also have a history of incredible discrimination against women. I cited this before, but as it came out during debate, women who join the military, I think, have a very strong understanding. They're going to have to work twice as hard, basically, to get the same opportunities that a man gets in the military. That's sort of understood. And because of that historical discrimination, you also have to wonder, if you are a person of color, if you're going to get a fair shake in the military. Now, I will admit, there are a lot of people that even faced with those odds, even knowing that they're going to have to work twice as hard and face that discrimination, they will join. But some will not. So again, there's another group of people that we've now taken off the table. I want to take a special moment to recognize on that last point of the willingness of people to join the military, even if they're facing discrimination. Where I live, in the Seattle Bellevue area, we have a lot of Nisei veterans and family of Nisei veterans. And it's a particularly compelling story. These are Japanese Americans who fought and died, in many cases, for our country during World War II, while their family members were unfairly incarcerated back home. So I know that there are people who will step up and take on that challenge anyway, but there will be fewer of them. So basically, you've got this huge group of people now that are going to be less likely to join the military because of what this bill does. And now I will, I think, slightly paraphrase a line from A Few Good Men. Basically, all this bill does is weakens our country. It weakens our ability to respect all of the people who should be allowed to serve, not just to serve, but to serve with an equal chance at advancement. Whether you're talking about women, whether you're talking about trans people, whether you're talking about people of color, this bill says that we're going to make it more difficult for you to get a fair shake in the military. And I do understand the DEI argument. But let me just say two things about that as I bring this to a close. First of all, there were a lot of very disturbing arguments made. I think the base renaming commission argument, even though technically it really didn't matter, was the most disturbing at all. As we once again heard all these speeches about how we need to honor our history and honor our heritage. The exact same arguments that were made over 100 years ago when this country went through a very concerted effort to make sure that we could establish white supremacy as the law of the land. The very same arguments that erected these monuments and named these bases and gave us the Ku Klux Klan and Jim Crow were made on the floor of this House. Now, it's shocking that those arguments were made. It is appalling that those arguments carried the day and actually won on all of these amendments and found themselves inserted in the bill. So all of that is very concerning. I do understand that there is a different set of arguments, and a very respectable set of arguments, that says that the way we are attempting to address the historical discrimination in this country is problematic. And that is primarily critical race theory. And there are certainly some in this country who have a view of this, that our country is nothing but racist. And that basically, and we've heard, I think Mike Waltz actually read this out in committee, and it's very accurate. There are some who believe that all white people are racists, that if you're a white person, you are by definition an oppressor, and you need to think about that. I've seen that. I've witnessed that. It's wrong, okay? In my opinion, it is not the correct way to approach that. So how should we handle that? Well, the way we have chosen to handle that is to get rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion completely and totally. And that's the problem. If you wanted to say we're not going to do that part of it, fine, but that's not what we did. And to the argument of, well, gee, all that does is that makes it fair. We shouldn't consider race. We shouldn't consider any of these things in determining excellence. The problem is, for 400 years, we did. And now, at the end of that, after all of the advantages that one particular group of people got, we're going to say it's going to be spared. I apologize. I urge opposition to this bill, though I do thank the people for the process that was put in place. Thank you.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I want to thank our bipartisan HASS staff for their tremendous work. As I talked about yesterday, our committee staff has worked for months, long hours, in a very bipartisan fashion to get us where we are today. I also want to thank everyone from the Office of Legislative Counsel, the Congressional Budget Office, the Parliamentarian's Office, the Clerk, the floor staff, the Rules Committee, and leadership on both sides of the aisle. I especially want to thank my friend, Ranking Member Smith, for his hard work and assistance. As a longtime former chairman of this committee, he gets the ebbs and flows of this process and has been a very helpful partner in helping me lead this committee. Mr. Chairman, this is a good bill. I'm going to address this to my conference. There is absolutely no reason why any Republican should vote against this bill. It will enhance the congressional oversight of the DOD, it will improve the quality of life for our service members and their families, and it will help build the ready, capable, and lethal fighting force we need to deter the Chinese Communist Party and other adversaries. I urge all members to support the bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendments en bloc offered by the gentleman from Alabama. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The en bloc amendments are agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in House Report 118-142, on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 63 by Mr. Banks of Indiana. Amendment number 64 by Mr. Roy of Texas. The chair will reduce to 2 minutes from the time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is the request for recorded vote on amendment number 63 printed in House Report 118-142 by the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Banks, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 63, printed in House Report number 118-142, offered by Mr. Banks of Indiana.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number have risen. A recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
Members, you have 1 minute. All members voted. Does any member want to change their vote? On this vote, the
Ms. Waters. Ms. Waters votes no. Ms. Perez. Ms. Perez votes aye. Mr. Huffman. Mr. Huffman votes no.
On this vote, the yeas are 218, the nays are 210. The amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is a request for recorded vote on amendment number 64, printed in House Report 118-142 by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, on which further proceedings were postponed, on which the ayes prevail by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 64, printed in House Report number 118-142, offered by Mr. Roy of Texas.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device, and members, this is a 2-minute vote. Members, you now have 1 minute.
This vote, the yeas are 217, the nays are 216. The amendment is adopted. There being no further amendments under the rule, the committee rises.
Much like yesterday, you're going to take this and report from down there. Thank you, sir. First thing you're going to just point down to Mr. Curtis and say, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, the committee of the whole House on the State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 2670 and proceeded to House Resolution 583. I report to the bill as amended by House Resolution 582 and by the House on July 13, 2013. With Sunday, it's further amendment adopted in the committee of the whole.
I gotta get my cheaters on. The chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 2670 and, pursuant to House Resolution 583, reports the bill as amended by House Resolution 582 and by the House on July 13, 2023, back to the House with sundry further amendments adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. In a separate vote demanded on any further amendment reported from the Committee of the Whole? If not, the chair will put them in gross. The question is on the adoption of the amendments. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2024 for military activities of the Department of Defense and for military construction, and for defense activities of the Department of Energy, to prescribe military personnel strengths for such fiscal year and for other purposes.
The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Members, take your conversations off the floor. This House will be in order. I don't even see him. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Pennsylvania seek this recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Ms. Houlihan of Pennsylvania moves to recommit the bill H.R. 2670 to the Committee on Armed Services.
Pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 19, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
For the yeas and nays. The yeas and nays.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Members, this is a 5-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, this is a 5-minute vote on the motion to recommit, and will be followed by 5-minute votes on passage of the bill if ordered. We're not on. And agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal if ordered. This is a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 210, the nays are 217. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The gentleman from Alabama, nays. The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. Members, you have 2 minutes. On this vote, the yeas are 219 and the nays are 210. The bill is passed without objection, and motion to reconsider this is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal, which the Chair will put de novo. The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the journal stands approved. Thank you.
Seek recognition. Do you want to quiet everyone down? For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent the clerk be authorized to make technical corrections in the engrossment of H.R. 2670, including corrections in spelling, punctuation, section and title numbering, gross referencing, conforming amendments to the table of contents, and short titles, and the insertion of appropriate headings. Thank you. Am I done?
Come on, Dawson.
No, I'm saying we don't need that.
Thank y'all. So,
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at noon on Monday, next for morning hour debate, and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
Without objection, so ordered. House will be in order. Please remove your conversations from the floor. The chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to celebrate today's passage of the fiscal year 2024 National Defense Authorization Act. In addition to making critical investments in our military, this legislation takes significant steps to protect the United States from CCP spying. For 16 years, CCP-owned logistics platform called Logink has tracked our commercial and military ships. This NDAA deters CCP aggression by enacting my plan to ban the DoD's use of Logink and working with our partners to ban it too. The CCP is spying on American citizens across every industry, field, and institution. Congress must act to shore up vulnerabilities to the CCP, especially when it comes to our military and commercial supply chains. This NDAA does just that. That is why I was proud to support it, and that is why I urge all our Senate colleagues to do the same. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House in 1 minute, revised and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to discuss the importance of preventative cancer care, especially colorectal cancer. Colorectal cancer is one of the deadliest cancers, but it has one of the highest survival rates if detected and treated early. Too many Americans put off routine screenings and colonoscopies because they worry about coverage. Now, UnitedHealthcare has made this disastrous decision to require patients to get prior authorization before they get colonoscopies. Their new policy comes at a time when colorectal cancer rates are rising nationwide, particularly in young Americans. This policy encourages more Americans not to get screenings and colonoscopies, and it will cause curable cancers issues to become life-threatening ones. I lost my father, Congressman Donald Payne Sr., to colorectal cancer in 2012. I do not want other families to lose their fathers and loved ones from a lack of preventative cancer care. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks as necessary.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, Washington has a spending problem. I know it, you know it, and more importantly, the American people know it. Our addiction to unaccountable spending has resulted in our nation accumulating more than $32 trillion in debt, leading to crippling inflation and a financial burden that future generations will struggle to overcome. That is why I have introduced the Principles-Based Balanced Budget Amendment, which will require annual spending and revenue to balance and will affirm the principle of fiscal responsibility through constitutional mandate. If ratified, this constitutional amendment would require Congress to balance the budget within 10 years while still allowing Congress to determine which mechanisms of how to achieve that balance through statute. Under the Constitution, Congress holds both the power of the purse and the responsibility of the purse. Let us fulfill that responsibility with a strict measure of accountability. I urge my colleagues to support this effort to affirm the principles of fiscal responsibility through constitutional mandate. Our financial future in America depends on it. We must act now. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New Jersey seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today, yet I am tired. I'm tired of having to come down to the well of this chamber to mourn the needless death of another child. I'm tired of gun violence being the leading cause of death among our precious children. And finally, I am tired of my colleagues across the aisle, when presented with an opportunity to do something about these tragedies, they do nothing. I'm disgusted that so few have signed on to any mental health legislation. My bill to invest in mental health resources for our young people passed this body just 2 years ago in a bipartisan fashion. But now, Republican sense of bipartisanship and even caring for the lives of others has vanished. Mr. Speaker, I must confess I am tired of marching down here to demand something that should have belonged to these children from the very beginning, their sense of safety. I may be tired, but I will not stop. And with that, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks. Mr. Speaker.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the life of a fellow Georgian, Charles T. Carmichael, Sr. An avid basketball player, Charles was the Georgia Player of the Year in high school before being recruited by South Georgia College to play basketball with them. He continued his love of the sport through adulthood, playing for the Golden Boys and winning the Georgia State title 12 times. The owner and operator of Dalton Auction Company, Charles loved working with people and connecting them to treasures. He was a scoutmaster in the Boy Scouts, where he mentored hundreds of young minds and supported 31 scouts in reaching Eagle Scout status. In his personal life, Charles was also an active teacher in his church, where he served as a ruling elder, deacon, and member of over 5 decades. His friends and family described him as a gentle giant with endless patience and a true family man, always there for those who needed him most. He will be missed dearly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to request unanimous consent to address the House and to extend and revise my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor the life of Mrs. Ella LaJoy Sojourner Fowler, a devoted mother, loving wife, community leader, and inspiring mentor. Ms. Fowler sadly passed away on July 5th at the age of 83. Born in Mississippi, Mrs. Fowler moved to Akron as a child, where she attended Akron Public Schools and eventually graduated from John R. Buchtel High School. Mrs. Fowler shared a passion for improving the health of our communities that was expressed through an illustrious nursing career, caring for Northeast Ohioans at Barberton City.
Still some of your tape? Oh. Did it change? It's not big as well, but and then there's Aaron Rodgers. Well, thank you. Of course. Huh? Oh, no. I'm trying to make sure this doesn't, like, fly away.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Good? All right.
I got it right here, Keenan. No. 5 minutes. No. Are you good? You want to move you want to move it? If you want to put yours on there too, it's okay too. Yep. They gave us like their B squad. Okay, I'll stand here, give you an audio test. Anything else you need? Okay, great. All right, this is an audio test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Audio test here in the Rayburn Room of the United States Capitol after passage of the National Defense Authorization Act. They said it couldn't be done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Good. Worth 2 minutes out, y'all.
First of all, thank you for coming. I'm sorry to disappoint you that Republicans continue to keep our promises, and we just, again, from all your questions all week long, will the NDA pass this week? Not many of you ever asked me about the policy, so I want to spend some moment. Your first question, yes, it passed. Now let's actually get through to what we promised the American public what we'd do. I first want to start thanking Chairman Rogers and all the members of the Armed Services Committee for the work they did. I'm grateful for their leadership on this important issue. House Republicans have made a commitment to America that we would fight for a nation that is safe. Today, we kept that promise by passing the National Defense Authorization Act. Under this bill, men and women in uniform who make sacrifices for our nation every day will receive the biggest pay raise in decades. We all know they deserve it. Radical programs that have forced our troops at the expense of readiness are now eliminated. Cutting-edge technology that is essential for the future of this country and to keep freedom around the world in the rise of China and Russia will receive more investment than we've watched in the past. And taxpayers will save more than $40 billion as this bill roots out wasteful spending. The real question that you never asked me that I wish you would, why did the Democrats vote no? Technically, it's a bipartisan vote, but 4 Democrats vote with us. Are the rest of the Democrats against a pay raise for their veterans? Are they against deterring China for a safe future? Are they against rooting out wasteful spending? Because they all voted against it today. They can claim a lot of things. But the biggest issue they claim why they voted against, they voted for just last year. It's a good thing that Republicans are in the majority, but it's more important that we keep our promises to America and to our men and women who serve to defend us. And today is exactly what we did. With that, let me call up our leader, Leader Steve Scalise.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good to see all of you here. Today was an important victory for our men and women in uniform who risked their lives to keep us safe. And it was also an important victory for every American in this country that wants to see our military focused on our enemies abroad, not on wokeness and all of the indoctrination attempts you're seeing within the Pentagon. And there was a massive rebuke of that far-left ideology and the push that we've seen under the Biden administration. These aren't things that Barack Obama did when he was president. Joe Biden has tried to change the focus of our military. And what you saw today and over the last week is Republicans and Democrats coming together to say, let's focus on our enemies all around the world. There are still bad actors out there that want to do us harm. There are still countries like China who are investing in a different kind of military that we need to be focused on. And as the Speaker pointed out, Chairman Rogers and all of the members of the House Armed Services Committee spent weeks and months putting together a bill that refocuses our military on their core mission, the mission that under the Constitution we as a Congress have an obligation to go out and fulfill and protect and fund. And that's what this NDAA does. It refocuses on the real threats to America as a free nation and as the leader of the free world, and allows us to get back focused on that role. Yeah, it's a shame that Democrats walked away from that. It's a shame that Democrats walked away from a 5% pay raise to our men and women in uniform who deserve it because they wanted to defend a far-left woke indoctrination ideology. That's not the focus of the Department of Defense. I am proud of what our members did coming together in a difficult time to say, let's get that focus back where it needs to be on defending America and protecting our friends around the world and standing up to the bad actors, which there are, and they're getting more and more aggressive. We need to be more and more focused. That's what today's vote produced. And the gentleman who put together that vote coalition is our whip, Mr. Emmer.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks, man. First, I want to thank
Speaker for his leadership, the Majority Leader, Elise, everybody who's up here. I want to thank the best Chief Deputy Whip that anybody could have in the entire Whip team, Guy Reschenthaler and the entire team. And I want to thank our members. I want to thank our members for remembering why they were sent here. They're sent here to put America first and American safety and security first, and that's exactly what they did today. Everybody said this couldn't happen. Again, as Guy was telling me on the way down here, I guess this was our next first big test. If you think about it, we've had 6 months now of Kevin McCarthy and our House Republican majority, Speaker McCarthy. And if the last 6 months have proven anything, and I hope you're starting to take notice, it's that House Republicans get stuff done. This is the group that has been doing the work. We've beaten the odds time and time again to deliver on our promises to the American people. When the talking heads here in Washington, and I'm not necessarily talking about you folks, but I might be, when the talking heads here in Washington insist that we can't pass things, we have proven them wrong every time, and today is no exception. Today, House Republicans led the way in supporting and strengthening our military by passing the fiscal year 2024 National Defense Authorization Act. The core tenets of this year's NDAA are simple. Modernize and bolster our military, take care of our men and women in uniform, and cut out the woke garbage that the Biden administration has forced on our service members. It's a shame, as you've heard already, that House Democrats couldn't put politics aside for one vote to join us in equipping our military heroes. Unfortunately, today proves once again that championing their partisan left-wing agenda is more important to the House Democrats than continuing the 6-decade tradition of coming together to strengthen our national defense and give service members the largest pay increase they have received in 20 years. But once again, House Republicans made up for where the Democrats have failed, and we will continue bringing along President Biden and the fellow members of his party along with us as we govern for the American people. And with that, our conference chair, Elise Stefanik.
Well, thank you to our whip and this entire leadership team. I also want to thank all of the members of the House Republican Conference. Today is a historic day. House Republicans have delivered yet another result on our commitment to America, a nation that is safe. This is particularly important to me in my district. I've been on the Armed Services Committee since I was first elected. I'm a senior member, a former subcommittee chair and ranker, and I have the honor of representing the 10th Mountain Division at Fort Drum, the most deployed division in the U.S. Army since 9/11. This NDAA strengthens our national security. It invests in our men and women in uniform. It invests in our military families. There are a number of provisions that I'm proud to have delivered. Tens of millions of dollars of investment in missile defense that will go at Fort Drum in upstate New York. The Service Member Parents' Bill of Rights that got bipartisan support in committee and is in the final bill. Investment in military housing and military child care, as well as the largest pay raise increase in the last 20 years. I'm so honored to serve with so many newly elected members on the House Armed Services Committee. One of our rising stars, and you're going to hear from two today, is Jen Kiggins, who is a Navy helicopter pilot, a former state senator, and the representative for Virginia Beach. Jen.
Thank you so much for being here with us today to celebrate the passage of the NDAA. One reason I ran for Congress was to restore strength for our military. It's so important that we not only fight for our service members and their families every day, but that we give them the resources and the tools they need to get the job done to defend our great nation. And this bill does a couple of things. It maintains the number of ships that the Marine Corps asked for, which was 31. We pushed back against the Biden administration, the number of ships they wanted to cut. We have to maintain that number of ships. We are behind when we look at our adversaries like China and where they are. So it's important to, again, protect our shipbuilding and our ship repair industry and to give these guys the tools that they deserve. Another really important win for us today was that this NDAA focused on quality of life issues for our servicemen and women and, again, and their families. For myself as a nurse practitioner, my focus was mental health for our military service members, and this bill does that. We had many amendments that got into the NDAA that expanded accessibility and availability of mental health care services for our military men and women. That's so important to us. In addition to the millions of dollars for child care and housing, so many of quality of life issues that we've neglected over the past few years that we need to continue to focus on Our military is great. Our military is ready to fight tonight. We are a strong fighting force. We are the best in the world. And I plan to keep it that way with the help of my colleagues and the other members of the Armed Services Committee. So thank you so much for paying attention to this important issue. And it's my honor to introduce a colleague and fellow Navy veteran, Nick LaLota from New York.
Thanks, shipmate. I appreciate that. Awesome words. I'm excited. As Americans, we're blessed to live in the greatest nation the world has ever known, and that's in large part because of our men and women who wear our nation's uniform. As the stepson of a Navy man, the brother of a Marine, the grandson of a Coast Guardsman, and a Navy veteran myself, and a member of the Armed Services Committee, I'm incredibly proud that we came together to pass the NDAA today. This is a good bill. It's a great bill, in fact, that increases pay, soldier pay, improves housing, education, child care funding, takes on China, cuts back wasteful spending, and ensures our military is the most lethal fighting force the world has ever known. I'm proud of the leadership of the folks behind me, and especially in the Armed Services Committee under Chairman Rogers, bringing us together, talking about, debating several amendments, both in committee and on the floor, that got us to the point that we passed this awesome bill that will fund our military. And I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues to ensure that we remain the greatest nation the world has ever known. Thanks so much. Back to the Speaker.
Thank you very much. With that, let's open up for questions. Yes, sir. Very excited you look.
One, how do you reconcile that the Senate product will be different and that it will be difficult, if not impossible, to have the culture war amendments in the conference version? And second, the ball's now in the Democrat-led Senate's hands. What message is the House sending to the Senate with this bill?
Just focus on the military. Stop using taxpayer money to do their own wokeism. A military cannot defend themselves if you train them in woke. We don't want Disneyland to train our military. We want our men and women in the military to have every defense possible, and that's what our bill does. The money focuses directly on their quality of life and, more importantly, on the investment. When you sit and look, and the whole concept of where I came up with the Select Committee on China was walking the graves of Normandy. As I walked those graves, I looked at those names. They're all about the same age. They came from different faiths, from a Star of David to crosses. They all died at the same time. And I thought, as a policymaker, because I walked right next to then at the time Speaker Pelosi, and I wondered, what could those policymakers have done that that day would have never happened? First and foremost, you put your politics aside and you focus on the military so war never becomes. That's what we did today in the NDAA. What the Democrats did was put their politics before the men and women who serve. They said no to a pay raise. They said no to an investment. They sent the wrong message to our adversaries around the world. Having a different bill in the Senate, you can ask me that on any bill that comes out of the floor. And you know what? I hope the bills that come out of the House are different than the bills that come out of that Schumer's in charge of. And you know what? We designed our government to be this way, because then we go to conference and we find where we can unite. There was a bipartisan vote on here, but the majority of Democrats decided to vote against giving our military a pay raise. And I think that's wrong. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
When Republicans talk about how you were able to assemble the votes to pass this, they say that certain commitments were made on AUMF votes. Can you talk us through what that looks like?
You know what's interesting? You guys say the same thing every time, okay? So let me just come back. What commitment was made?
That's what I'm asking you.
Well, how can you bring something up if something didn't create it? You know what's so interesting to me? You guys live in fantasy. No. What I told everybody from the process is, does AUMF go through the armed services? Does it? Okay, it doesn't have the jurisdiction. Do any of you know what committee deals with AUMF? Foreign Affairs. Was this a Foreign Affairs bill? No. And so, Foreign Affairs is taking up AUMF. Would I want to something as serious as an AUMF vote to take 2 minutes on the floor? No. So I made the commitment to the American public that we will go through the Committee of Jurisdiction. AUMF is working its way through Foreign Affairs. It's scheduled to come back in September. And it's something as serious as this, we're not going to spend 2 minutes on. We are going to I don't know how long it's going to take to understand the Democrats no longer control this place. The establishment no longer controls Washington on the House side. We have opened this place up. Bills will go through committee. We're going to get amendments on the floor. People are going to have input. You're not going to get jammed on a bill. You're going to have time to read it. And you know what? The AUMF is going to get done, even though they haven't been able to do it for years, and we'll solve this problem exactly how it's structured to happen. It'll go through Foreign Affairs, and it'll come to us in September, and we won't have a 2-minute vote to decide whether we go to give authorization to go to war or not, and something that's been lingering out there for 20 years. I think it's too serious and too important, and it's the commitment I made to the American public. So no, I didn't do something special on this bill. I just kept the promise we made from the very beginning. Yes, ma'am. Yes, I asked Marjorie if she would be on the conference committee. Yeah. I mean, not to repeat myself, but I'm going to love the day that I come in that you're going to sit back and say, oh, you told me this 6 months ago, that's why you're doing it, instead of thinking it's something special. What I firmly believe in any conference is that you have to be reflective of our entire conference. So there'll be a number of people who serve. And I requested if Marjorie would be able to serve, to be able to work on, she has a number of issues that she cares about in the military, and she agreed to be able to serve on that, along with a number of other people that will. Well, I don't want to take all your attention away, so wait and you'll be able to see the list when I provide it. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So before the NDAA vote, the House Freedom Caucus held a press conference touting the conservative victories in the bill. I want to ask you if you agree with one of your colleagues' comments today, Clay Higgins of Louisiana. He said, we gradually shifted the center of gravity of the Republican conference towards the right. What do you think of that?
I would think the election has shifted, that we actually focus on exactly what we had said we would do. Have you ever read The Commitment to America? Okay. So what have we done since we've taken the majority? We have kept our commitment to America, and that's exactly what we're doing. Yes, sir.
On Ukraine, in addition to, I guess, Carol putting Ms. Taylor Greene on the conference committee, on Kate's amendment, there were 7 Republicans who indicated they were basically willing to cut and run for helping out Ukraine. Should Ukraine be worried about U.S. support in light of that? It's a 30-year conference.
No. Did you see the overall vote? I know. You asked me a question. I'm answering your question. So what did this bill pass by? On a bipartisan vote. What was the Ukraine amendment? What did that pass by? It failed with over 300 votes the other way. So you know math as well as I do, and that's an overwhelming support here. So I'd read it as that. Yes, sir.
Is there any concern at all? Tony Gonzalez yesterday, he said it's an unfortunate and a missed opportunity that this bill is going to be a close to party line vote. Coming out of committee was extremely bipartisan, and you got all these amendments. Is there concern that the military is getting politicized recently?
You know, it's a concern of me that Democrats have politicized this. Because sit and think for exactly what your question is, and I would think Tony would think this the same way. The Democrats said they're not going to vote for giving the military a pay raise, for giving the military an investment to make the world safer, unless they had wokeism. They said they would not pay and give them a 5% pay raise unless they go against something they voted for a year prior in a Hyde Amendment. So yes, it is concerning to me that the Democrats have gone that far. For 4 decades, for 40 years, up until last year, they supported Hyde. What changed? What changed? What made them vote? I'm sure you asked them the question. Why would they vote against the military on something they had voted for, even the minority leader, a year before? And then he criticized people from New York on something that he actually voted for as well? That's hypocrisy. That's playing politics. That's not right. To do that to our men and women in uniform? We have 2 veterans right up here. Jen Kiggins flew helicopters. Her husband flew F-18s. Her children went into the military. Nick, same thing. What do you think they think when they look back? And when they get an answer from the Democrats? It may have been good enough to vote for it a year before. And what does it actually mean? It means that they want to take taxpayer money to spend on something other than the military. And all we're saying on the NDAA, let's use the money on the military. So, yes, ma'am. How, can you tell me the jurisdiction of where this would be done then? Well, do you think it doesn't belong in the NDA if you're talking about how to? Well, it's not just me, the parliamentarian does. See, what's very interesting here is, for 40 years we have decided no matter where you sit on this issue, don't use taxpayer money for it. And that's called the Hyde Amendment. It is the military who, a few people in the brass, who are probably taking orders from somebody else in the White House now, to go against the law. All we simply say is reinstate where everybody has stood for 40 years and focus on the military. You're concerned about wokeism. I'm concerned about wokeism too. I think our men and women that I listen to today that are having a hard time to meet our recruiting levels. And when you talk to a number of people, I just read an article, I'm not sure if somebody in this room wrote it, that we have men and women who are veterans from the military who are now not encouraging their children to take the same path based upon what's being trained today. I think we need to change course. So your question earlier, has the Congress changed? Yes, the Congress has changed. We're keeping the commitment we said we would do. We're focusing on the principles that make America stronger and freer and keep us safer so we will never be in war again. Last question, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Even though it's just a small number, what do you make of your fellow members who did not support this bill, particularly those like Congressman Crane who pushed some of these amendments and ultimately didn't support final passage? And speaking of Congressman Crane, what is your reaction to his remarks yesterday on the floor referring to African Americans as colored? I know he said that he misspoke, but is that acceptable?
That's not acceptable. I'll take him at his word that he misspoke. I have never heard him use that before. So you'd have to ask him about that. I hope you have all a great weekend. I look forward to your question on Monday. Will we be able to pass a bill next week as well? So I think we will. And I look forward to you asking me questions about policy, too, sometime next week. Take care.
Great remarks. FAA. So read up on the bill. Don't just come ask me the day that it'll pass. You know what? I love how you underestimate us every single week. It gives me something to do. I think we can find common ground on that. There's an ability. Look, that is a heavy used runway, but only 3 certain times during the day. So you got to focus on when you bring the other ones in. But I think it's a place we can all find common ground. Look, we watch what Buttigieg's not doing a very good job. Even the VP said, get this done. We've got a shortage when it comes, we've got a 43% shortage in there for workers in the flight. We've got to get that situated. And if they're not going to do the job, we will. So I look forward. But I do hope you keep underestimating us. So every time it's a big success and a surprise. Who wrote the headline today that it's another big test of whether I'll survive this week? Who wrote that? Somebody.
Thank you.
Well, okay, this is my philosophy and belief on the FBI. I was, during break,
This is about FBI. And what time is it? I got to have a meeting. Okay. Okay, you're lucky. I got time. So the other day, I was down in Orange County for a meeting with a number of members and a number of sheriffs and the FBI. And you may not know this, and we're dealing with this in approach. So we have a problem in America with individuals from Chile, because they're in the visa waiver program, where they're coming in, they're robbing a number of homes because we can't do the background check within the others. Well, we have 40 countries that were in the visa waiver program. They have a whole FBI unit that looks at this in California, in the section that's gone on down there and everywhere else. That is really good use of the FBI. This idea that we're going to build a new big Pentagon and put all the FBI mainly in one place, I don't think is a good structure. I think the rank and file of the FBI, the more we put them out across the country to help stop crime and work with those others is positive. It's just like if you think of a school district. Is it better we have a lot of administration and few teachers, or do we have a smaller administration and more teachers? So I don't know moving to Huntsville is the answer. I personally think structure dictates behavior. I'd like to see the structure of a much smaller FBI administration building and more FBI agents out across the country helping us keep the country safer. To me, that's better. And if you think about, in today's dollars, a new Pentagon costs $900 million. They're asking for billions. And I just don't think that's the best use or the best structure. Yeah, you know, we put bipartisan and different committees together on this. Ray didn't do himself any favors, and he hasn't. I've talked to him personally about this as well. Anybody here from the Washington Post, you had a very interesting story where you found that FBI actually used data that they weren't supposed to use, time and again, against Americans, that they didn't have the right through the FISA court to do this. And they just tell us, oh, that was a mistake, we won't do it again. I think they have a real trust problem on both sides of the aisle when it comes to FISA, and it has to be reauthorized. And I think with him not answering questions only makes it worse.
Just a quick one. What's your reaction to Representatives Omar Bowman and Ocasio-Cortez saying they'll skip the Israeli president before joint session of Congress next week?
It's unfortunate. I think anti-Semitism shouldn't be anywhere, and especially shouldn't be inside Congress. Yes.
Just back to the NTA. Freedom House had a press conference for the NTA.
I didn't get to see the press conference. I'm sorry.
Well, they took credit for forcing a bunch of these amendments instead of succeeding. Are they running the House right now?
I don't think so, but apparently you do. So.
Back to NDAA also. I mean, the Democrats watching the floor debate last night, some of the commentary that we already heard about. Isn't this entire result of sort of the bill is now one from being bipartisan to what I think was an ode to bigotry? What is your reaction to that? That you loaded up this bill with measures that really are, in other words, an ode to bigotry?
So for 40 years they voted for bigotry? No, that's what that was their whole point. So for 40 years they voted for bigotry. Last year they voted for bigotry. No. Why would you even have to have a critical race theory amendment? Why did they put it in? You've been here a number of years, so you followed it when Chairman Smith first took over this year and made it very wokeism and made it very partisan on his lines. All we simply did was bring it back, to bring it back to what the Defense Department actually wants to have happen, to be able to train our men and women, to be able to defend our nation and not be able to have to go to war, to prepare ourselves so the world could be safer. They want to make everything partisan, and I think that's unfortunate. Hope you all have a good week and take care.